And we continue at 1:06 in the afternoon on the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
Will writes in at johnnydontlikeshow@gmail.com and says, every time Gavin opens his lying mouth about anything at all, I picture the inside of that crater called his head, hamsters on their wheel to nowhere, just like his fake choo-choo.
800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. Well, one of the issues that is being debated right now on cable news and beyond is if the people around Joe Biden who knew that his cognitive abilities had gone to hell and decided to cover it up anyway, if there would be punishment for them. Punishment primarily coming from Democratic Party voters, because Democratic Party voters were told that Joe was fine. They seemed to believe it, and Joe was on his way to winning the Democratic nomination for president for a second time. That's when everything fell apart, and Democratic voters ended up with 4 years of Donald Trump. Now, Democratic voters are furious, and if they decide that they're going to start to punish those around Joe Biden who lied on his behalf, then one of those people who could theoretically face a set of angry voters is the former vice president, Kamala Harris. She hasn't tipped her hand as to just exactly what she plans on doing next, but if she is going to stay in politics, she basically has two options. She could run for president again in 2028, or she could come back to California and run for governor in 2026. That field is already filling up with a bunch of Democrats and a couple of different Republicans. Many of these candidates are cagey about just exactly what they would do if Kamala Harris were to enter the race. At first, most of them said they'd drop out. Now they're saying they would have to evaluate the state of the race and they'd make a decision afterwards. If Kamala Harris is wounded and her polling numbers suffer because of it, many of these other candidates could feel emboldened not only to stay in the race, but to take it to her and to say that she wasn't being honest when she was asked about Joe Biden's condition, and California needs a governor who's a Democrat, but an honest one. And one of those people who I think would have no problem sticking a knife in Kamala Harris's back is former Orange County Congresswoman Katie Porter. And while Kamala is taking daggers nationally, Katie Porter is trying to get her name out there here in the Golden State.
Katie Porter sat down with Fox 40's Nikki Laurenzo for a 25-minute interview covering a whole bunch of issues facing the state of California. Let's give it a listen.
Glad you're with us this week. I'm Nikki Laurenzo in Sacramento. On the show today, she is a top contender for California governor in 2026.
Californians hear a lot of excuses from elected officials.
That's a complex problem. That's proving challenging.
That's not my job.
It's too hard.
What a bunch of bull.
There she is, Andrew Dice Porter.
What we need is new ideas.
That is Katie Porter. She is running to be the next governor of California. She is a former Democratic member of Congress, ran for the U.S. Senate last year, a professor at UC Irvine, and a single mom of 3 kids. And Katie Porter joins us now on Inside California Politics. Thanks for being back.
Absolutely.
You know what she forgot to say?
What's that?
You're a woman in a minivan with a potty mouth.
Now, of course, if Katie Porter's ad is about all those nonsense bunch of BS answers for California's problems, that must mean somebody who's in charge right now isn't doing their job. So what does she have to say to the current leadership in Sacramento?
Okay, so the last time we spoke when we had you in studio, you hadn't announced your candidacy yet. You are now in this race. And I want to start, too, with that clip that we played from your ad and paraphrase. You say there are BS excuses on how to fix California problems.
I mean, she said the whole BS.
Yeah, she doesn't really censor herself much, does she?
But we have to.
Not a lot of self-control going on there.
From our leaders. Do you feel like our leaders in elected office aren't doing their jobs right now?
Well, I think there's an urgency to delivering results that this moment calls for. So I think that part of what this governor's race is going to be about, I very much hope, because I think I have a lot to offer here, is getting things done. There's a sort of impatience.
What has she gotten done?
Nothing. she spent her time in Congress haranguing executives.
There's a sort of impatience that I bring, frankly, temperamental.
Oh, so close.
Oh, wait, she's talking about temperamental here?
Yes.
There's a sort of impatience that I bring, frankly, temperamentally, that I think is in line with where voters are.
Oh, yes. Voters are so angry, we want a governor who's going to walk right over to that legislature and take a pot of boiling potatoes and slam dunk it right on the speaker's head.
Some of our problems, like the cost of housing, have been with us for decades now, and they're getting worse, not better. And I think there's folks in the California legislature, I think there are people in advocacy who are coming together to say we need to focus on our biggest problems, and we need to bring a kind of sense of can-do urgency to delivering on those.
Okay, so she's afraid to call anybody out.
Okay, if you're Katie Porter, the establishment is never going to get behind you. They hate your guts. You could put them... If you're looking at a measurement of hostility towards Katie Porter, the Democratic Party is right there with her ex-husband. You're never going to win them over. If you think they're bad at their job, just say it.
No!
Katie Porter is asked what makes her different from other candidates.
So this is a crowded field, as you know. What sets you apart from the other Democrats who are running in this race right now?
Well, a number of things. One is that I think I have the federal experience to think about how to deal with what Donald Trump is going to do.
Oh, boy.
First answer is about fighting Donald Trump.
She knows that by the time she gets elected, if she got elected and is sworn into office, it'll be January of 2027, and the Trump era will be almost over.
What's that saying where certain people in power see themselves as a hammer and they see everyone else as a nail? I think she sees everyone else as the ex-husband.
To California. Our next governor is going to have to be a health care governor. Why? Because we're going to see cuts potentially to Medicare, to Medicaid coming out of Washington, and I have a track record of dealing with those federal issues, pharmaceutical pricing, mental health care.
Wasn't she accused of being bipolar?
Believe that was in one book.
Like, please.
Let's hear about, I'm moving on, because I don't need to hear Katie Porter meandering about federal issues that don't affect the state of California. Katie Porter, what do you say about the fact that all of California's problems may have led from one-party rule for the past 15 years?
Well, and speaking of the honesty with the voters, too, because, I mean, this is something that the Republicans are going to point out in this race is, you know, California's been under one-party rule, and all of these issues were passed and approved by Democrats. So as part of that honesty, calling out your own party.
I've always been willing to look for good ideas and to call out bad ones wherever they are coming from.
This is a perfect place. Give me some bad ideas that you disagree with that you think the legislature's putting forth right now.
Okay, there's a difference, though, between running around making enemies and actually critiquing bad ideas.
And so I didn't go to Washington to do things the usual way. And by the way, I didn't. I was willing to do things and say things and push for things that my colleagues weren't. Let me give you an example. During COVID, we had the Center.
Oh, no.
Okay, the reason that she pissed off her colleagues was because she would try to go around their backs to get what she wanted. There was a story. It may have been, I don't know. I forget which book it was in. But there was a story where she wanted on financial services or banking, one of those committees. I think Maxine Waters was the chairman of the committee. And Maxine wanted nothing to do with her and wouldn't put her on the committee. So she went around Maxine's back and somehow got put on the committee without Maxine signing off on it. And Maxine went right to Nancy Pelosi, and Nancy Pelosi promptly kicked her off. Now, if Katie Porter were to tell the story, it's because they didn't want her to hold big banks accountable. They didn't want corporate executives to be harangued by her on C-SPAN. When in reality, I have no clue if they objected to any of those things. What they didn't like was that she was being rude.
We love everybody.
And she called them a bunch of old ladies, too. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
She wanted them to change the time that the committee met because it didn't work for her and her child care needs. And the committee chairman said no. And she complained and said it's all a bunch of old ladies who don't have kids at home who don't understand what single moms go through.
Let's move on from that last question, because she's not going to answer it, to how the legislature is handling California's housing crisis.
So as you're surveying things, and I know you're a policy wonk too, as you're surveying things and looking what's going on in Sacramento, is there something that you're eyeing where you're saying...
Notice that Nikki's trying her hardest to focus the conversation back on California.
Well, this is going to be the challenge for Steve Hilton or Chad Bianco or whoever the Republican is. Because what they're going to do in those debates is they're going to talk about Donald Trump, they're going to talk about abortion, they're going to talk about Medicare, Medicaid, Ukraine, whatever, subjects that have nothing to do with anything related to California, and you just have to bring them back to their failures.
You're eyeing where you're saying this legislature or this current administration isn't doing this, and I would change that this way, something specific.
Yeah. So on the doing something positive that I want to help accelerate, let me give you a positive example first.
Okay, that wasn't the question.
No. But she's going to answer it the way she wants to.
We are starting to see people willing to push to streamline regulation around building housing. It simply costs too much and it takes too long to build housing.
I've never heard that one before.
Very original.
And if we're going to grow our population, if we're going to keep businesses expanding in this state, not leaving here to go elsewhere, we have to make the cost of living affordable. And the biggest way to do that is housing, right? That's the biggest chunk of everybody's budget. And
of course, Katie Porter's an expert in this field because she has been in subsidized teacher housing for decades.
Yeah, when's the last time she's put a down payment on a house in California?
And now that she's running for governor, why is she still allowed to be in that UCI housing?
Well, now we know why she's running for governor. She's looking for more public housing.
And so we're seeing people say CEQA, our Environmental Quality Act reform, needs to be revised. It's important to protect the environment.
Wait, I thought Gavin said he's done that 40 times in the last 6 years.
Oh, yeah. Don't you get the papers, lady?
It's important to protect the environment. I'm a champion for the environment. But to just throttle things and make them take longer and cost...
You know how you know she's a champion for the environment? She never litters. All of the wrappers are in the back of her van.
Yeah, I'd like to see how much black smoke is coming out of the back of that van. The back of that van looks like the conclave over in Rome.
But to just throttle things and make them take longer and cost more, that's not environmental protection. That's just hurting all of California, especially because a lot of that new housing would actually be better for our environment. I think in terms of things that are happening that I would sort of do differently.
New housing would be better for the environment? What? Does she want us to live like Daryl Hannah up in the trees?
I think in terms of things that are happening that I would sort of do differently, there are a lot of bills in the legislature that I think are sort of about little things. And so one example is there's a bill right now to mandate that the bottle caps on water bottles have to be attached. Again, no one wants to see plastic pollution. I represented a coastal area. I understand the importance of California's leading role in the environment.
You know, this is a pretty easy one. You don't need to qualify it 10,000 ways.
Okay, now wait a minute. If she's talking about how frivolous legislation and frivolous ideas need to be eliminated, wasn't she the woman who gave a speech on the floor of the House dressed like a pirate with a pirate accent about dishwashers?
I think the pirate costume was for a different thing, but there was a whole thing about dishwashers.
What I haven't heard about is anything about dishwashers.
I believe the pirate costume was for a floor speech about porch pirates.
Oh, that's right. I'm conflating two things together.
But we literally had a big chunk of California burning in the LA wildfires. We have to focus on our biggest challenges. And so I think trying to work with the legislature to harness their energy, to harness their good ideas, again, from both sides of the aisle, to get them pointed toward what are California's biggest longstanding challenges, like housing, for example, cost of childcare, big problem here, but also to get them thinking and ready for what Trump is going.
Oh, boy.
This is part of the problem. You may have whatever issues are your pet issues, and maybe that's what motivated you to get in politics in the first place. That's fine. If you're the governor or you're the mayor or you're the chief executive, you don't necessarily get to pick your issues. The issues, if there's a crisis, are presented to you. There is a fire wipes out a neighborhood, and it's impossible to rebuild because the state of California has so many useless regulations and layers of bureaucracy. Okay, that may not be one of your pet issues, but you need to fix that. No one can buy homeowners insurance right now in California because our insurance market is screwed up. You better have ideas about that. Go back to the fires for a second. There was no water in the reservoir. As it turns out, we passed a water bond way back when, allocating a lot of money for things like reservoirs and more water systems in California. And as it turns out, we haven't built any of them because of the regulatory process. More water means more housing. If you want more housing, how about leaning on them to build those reservoirs and to do what voters told you to do? There are answers to all of these questions, to all of these problems, but she's not interested in any of it. She's interested in being the foil to Donald Trump. She's interested in talking about her federal issues that involved earmarks and those sorts of things, corporate PAC money that has nothing to do with anything in California, but that's what she cares about. She's running for the wrong office. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Rick writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Hey, John and Randy, folks in NorCal want to know, what's the deal with the drop of Katie Porter screaming Paul followed by theme music?
Paul!
John, you want to answer that one?
Well, we were covering the U.S. Senate race here in California when she was running against Adam Schiff and Barbara Lee and Steve Garvey, and a local television station in the Sacramento area followed her around for a couple of days, and they followed her into her house, where, among other claims she made, is that she has an exercise bike in the kitchen. And while she was in the kitchen talking to the reporter, it was time to summon her son, and she screamed his name out as loud as she could.
Paul!
And I thought, because I couldn't make out what she was saying at first, that she was saying, ho, and it sounded like Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And that's how we ended up with Paul and the music. While Kamala Harris, who is believed to be the front runner, even though she's not a declared candidate, to be the next governor of California, is getting whacked all over the place because of what's going on with Joe Biden and the cover-up surrounding his mental decline and his cancer diagnosis, the other Democrats who are vying to be California's next governor are trying to get their name out there all over the state. One of them is Katie Porter. She sat down for an interview with the television station in Sacramento, and we're going over the sound.
Let's hear what Katie Porter has to say in this interview with Nikki Laurenzo on Fox 40 about homelessness.
I want to pivot now into homelessness. This has been such a massive issue that has spanned years, and leaders at the state level, governor, legislature, city, county, have not been able to really wrap their arms around this, despite all of the money being issued towards this, fixing this problem.
Which includes $20 billion over 5 years.
Many of those dollars going to phony baloney organizations that use those dollars to enrich themselves.
What would you do differently as governor?
Yeah, so I think we are seeing local leaders develop some approaches that are working. But
Where?
Give an example, because there's an example in San Jose where they offer them treatment. If they don't take it, they put them in jail, which is the preferred option. And then you have Los Angeles, which is where you tax everyone to death. You spend a ton of money on your friends, and the problem gets worse.
Oh, and you have your appointed head of the homeless agency that gives out all that money lie about how effective your programs are.
Wouldn't be complete without cooking the books.
But one of the problems is for every family that's being moved or person off the streets into permanent supportive housing, into some kind of living situation that's permanent, more are coming.
No.
They're on drugs or they're mentally ill. You give them a motel room and they still hang out in the encampments because that's where the drugs are.
Because of that cost of housing. So I think one thing is it's just really important to understand homelessness doesn't come from nowhere. It is directly related to the cost of housing.
She is totally clueless.
This is what you get when you get someone that's been in Congress. She has no idea about the reality, what's going on, even in her own backyard.
No, and she lives on a college campus. And let me tell you, as someone who spent many years going to school, college campuses are in no way indicative of the world around them. Irvine is a very safe community. It typically makes the list of safest big cities in the United States. It's tract homes. It's right next to Newport Beach and other wealthy areas. There are a lot of people there with high education. It's not like the rest of the state. She may think the problem is the high cost of housing in Irvine as to why students pile into an apartment or have to stay with their parents after they graduate. Fine. Maybe that's the case in that particular community. But statewide, people aren't living on the streets because of the high cost of housing. They're there because of meth and fentanyl.
To the cost of housing, it's also directly related to people's ability to get substance use treatment and mental health treatment early when they're first experiencing these conditions. The data is really clear on this. The longer somebody experiences chronic street homelessness, the more difficult it is to help them, the more expensive it is to help them.
Yes, because every hit of meth deteriorates the brain just a little bit more, and we enable that in California.
You don't need a university study to understand that concept, by the way.
And so I think one thing I would say to people is we can't expect our local governments to solve homelessness.
Gavin can.
Because he doesn't want to be blamed.
That's Gavin's whole approach. It's the cities and counties' fault. I did everything right.
If the state and the federal government are not doing their part to bring down the cost of housing and prevent homelessness, I'm interested in that prevention piece. It is much, much cheaper and much better for us as a society.
It's also meaningless.
Here is, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here. Here is how I would have approached this. If I have a candidate for governor on the program and I want to ask them about homelessness, saying homelessness is a problem, what are you going to do about it, is a very open-ended way of having the discussion. And you typically end up with answers like this. Well, it's the high cost of housing. Well, we need to offer more programs for substance abuse and mental illness. And. They all say that. The question should be, will you bust up the encampments? If there is illegal public camping going on, illegal open-air drug use, will you shut them down? Because you don't need any new laws for that. They're already on the books. You just need to have the will to follow through. If they refuse treatment, are you willing to put them in jail? That's what's going on right now in San Jose. And that mayor is not backing down. As governor, are you willing to put them in jail if they do not accept treatment in these programs and facilities? And then the third thing I would ask is, are you going to build more prisons so we don't have to let so many people out of prison early so they move from prison into these criminal encampments? And they use these encampments as their base to prey on people in nearby communities. That right there is the list of questions that should be asked of all of these candidates. Otherwise, if you don't pin them down on those specifics, they will give you these nebulous answers that sound great, and it sounds like a really complicated problem, and it sounds like she's looking for a holistic approach, but it actually means nothing.
To spend a little bit of money to keep a family able to pay their rent than it is to have them wind up in an overcrowded situation, living in their car or living on the street. So I think we're working on dealing with the end point of the problem, which is people who are experiencing street homelessness. We need to do more on the prevention pieces.
Every study has shown that that's usually a grift too.
Oh, yes. And this is why they all always move in that direction. because politically connected people run those organizations and they can launder more money to their friends, and then the money finds its way back to them.
All the way back to the cost of housing. I think the other piece is really, again, making sure people are getting the care that they need and empowering. I thought Governor Newsom's Care Court concept of saying to people, you have to get this care, or if you're continuing to...
Nobody has used it.
No. You notice she called it a concept.
Yeah. Gavin touted this was the thing that was going to solve all the problems, and nobody followed through with it because that's Gavin Newsom. Flashy headline, no follow through.
To experience these problems, it's up to us to make sure as a society you're getting the care you need. And I'm interested in visiting some of those courts. I've already started talking to some of the judges to understand whether those courts are working.
There's nobody in them. It's like for the entire state, maybe a half a dozen people.
It's like care courts are another version of the high-speed rail. It's something that he made a lot of noise about that doesn't really practically exist.
Let's talk about something that Gavin doesn't like. How does Katie Porter feel about Prop 36?
And people also, there are so many layers to this crisis California is dealing with because it's a cost issue, it's a housing availability, it's a mental health issue, a substance abuse, and then there's also a layer of it that people see there's criminal activity going on. And I want to specifically ask you about Prop 36, passed overwhelmingly by the voters in the last election. Democrats in the legislature have been accused of sort of not implementing it fast enough. Where do you stand on that?
Well, so one of the things I did here that I think is really really emblematic of how I'm going to approach this job is I went and got information. I didn't assume that just what...
She did a Google on the YouTube?
Well, that would make George Gascon happy.
Do a Google on YouTube.
I didn't assume that just what Democrats say is the right thing. I went and talked to people. I talked to retailers. I talked to some law enforcement folks. And I asked them, what is it that Prop 36 is going to do well, or what is it not going to do well? And one of the most surprising things I heard was from some of the retailers themselves that while Prop 36 gives more tools for criminal enforcement on the back end, they would like to see more tools to prevent shoplifting on the front end.
What does that mean? Locking up the socks?
I have no clue what she means by that. We already are locking up the socks.
On the front end, or retail theft. So I do think Governor Newsom's program to crack down on the sort of large groups of retail theft, the high-end retail theft, was important. When you talk to retailers, they're saying, once we've had to...
You know, for someone who opened this answer by talking about she did all the research, she's not talking about anything that has to do with Prop 36.
No. In fact, I don't remember her taking a public position on Prop 36 before that election. Do you?
She did not. She was in hiding.
A real profile in courage.
Once we've had to call the police and make an arrest in the store, that's already caused a big disruption to our business. We want clearer rules to be able to know when can we use surveillance, when can we detain someone, how can we set our stores up in ways or design our parking lots in ways that keep people safe as they're going about their business in California. So I do think Prop 36 is the law of the land. California voters have voted for it, and so we do have to implement it.
Well, Gavin said no. Gavin's not putting any funding toward it.
I still am not clear on whether or not she supported it.
I'm not clear that she knows what it is.
And I think that's a big job of the governor here is to do some oversight. You know, I famously am passionate about oversight. I think it's important for the governor to do oversight. If a law is passed, then let's get it implemented. If it's not working after it's implemented, it's also the governor's job to report that back to the legislature and push for further changes.
Okay, if you're going to run as the outsider who's a straight talker, you have to answer the question.
When we come back, Johnny, here's a question you really can't wiggle your way out of. How does Katie Porter come down on an automatic felony for people that want to purchase 16 and 17-year-olds for sex?
I'll tell you, before we get to that, before we take our break, this is part of the reason that Trump got elected. You ask Trump a question, he'll give you a straight answer. You may or may not like it, but you'll be clear on just exactly where he stands. You listen to Kamala Harris, you listen to Katie Porter, you listen to Javier Becerra, and they're asked a question that's a relatively simple question, And none of them answer it. And none of them answer it in a way where a semi-intelligent person can understand the point they're trying to make. And they all seem to do it. I'll tell you, I know they hate him. I know all of these people running for governor hate Donald Trump with the hot, hot hate of 1,000 suns. But if we had someone in this race that could answer questions as clearly and as concisely as he could, this might end up being a race because they've wrecked this state and none of them can answer a simple question. Not one of them. And to the extent that they can, they're making arguments that are totally indefensible. Like the bullet train is still a good idea. Crime is actually going down. We have a homeless problem because of the high cost of housing. Who on planet Earth is on enough drugs to believe that? Right now we're going through the sound of California gubernatorial candidate Katie Porter on with Inside Politics.
Let's hear what Katie Porter has to say about the kerfuffle in the assembly last week with trying to make an automatic felony for someone trying to purchase a 16 or 17-year-old for the purposes of sex.
I want to ask you about a battle that's happening in the Capitol right now, and I want to ask you about this because Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis, who's also running for this job that you're running for, came out and spoke out in favor of this legislation. Sex trafficking bill, this was the subject of our show last week, making an automatic felony to purchase 16 and 17-year-olds for sex in the state of California. Where do you stand on that? Because, again, a lot of debate over this. This was introduced by a Democrat, and then sort of things unraveled at the state capitol. If you were governor, what would your stance be?
Well, I think this is really straightforward. Children should never be purchased, used, or abused for sex trafficking. Period, full stop. I'm the mom of 3 teenagers, a 19-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 13-year-old, and I don't think there's anyone in this, or certainly anyone who should be in leadership in California at the top levels of our state, who should think otherwise.
Well, that's a lot of them.
It shows you how insane they are in Sacramento right now. It really does. Where you have these other people who are running statewide who are also certifiable, but not as crazy as them.
How exactly this bill moves through the legislative process, I think this has been a little bit of a hot mess, frankly.
So close.
And so I think it's important for us who are running for office, who are in leadership, to be unequivocal with voters. Children should be protected from sex trafficking in California, full stop. And that includes 16 and 17-year-olds. California is often very quick to put requirements on 16 and 17-year-olds. Think about our graduated driving license requirements. And so if my son can't drive past 11 p.m., he sure as hell shouldn't be able to be bought and sold for sex. That's disgusting. And so I think...
Poor Paul. All right, let's hear what Katie Porter has to say about the high-speed rail.
Okay, another hot button issue that has a lot of focus nationally, too, in California, high-speed rail. As governor, well, first of all, where are you on this project? Are you in support of continuing the high-speed rail project?
Well, so look, increasingly, the evidence is showing that this project is not going to be able to be completed remotely on budget or remotely on time. I think we're already past those benchmarks.
Right.
So I don't.
Yes, by about 5 years.
Nice to have you with the program, Katie.
Benchmarks.
Right.
So I don't think we should sort of BS. I think I can say that. I don't think we should BS California voters. They have noticed that we don't have a high-speed rail, and they have noticed that we have spent money on it. So I think one of the first orders of business as California governor is to take a clear-eyed, fresh look at this project. If we're going to do it, we got to get it done on a certain timeline. And I think increasingly...
I'm just going to do it better.
She has changed her position on this because originally it was we need to cut bait. And then the unions went nuts. And now her position is, well, we should finish it, but I need to be in charge so we can actually finish it in a reasonable period of time.
And I think increasingly there's suggestions that that's not going to be possible. I do think California would benefit tremendously from a high-speed rail. And I think the federal government here taking away transportation dollars, not giving us our share of the money.
Okay, she federalized it again. We're done.